Hello, and welcome to the next part of our Chapter a Day series working through the book of Genesis. We find ourselves today in Genesis chapter 32, and I want us to get right into this chapter because there's a lot happening here. Jacob is on his way back to the land of promise. He has left Haran. He is traveling now with his two wives, with his children, with his great livestock, with his servants, which all that the Lord has blessed him with during his time away. But now he's returning home. And it's important for us to realize as Jacob is returning home, we need to remember something about what is waiting for him at home. If you recall, the reason why Jacob left the land of promise to begin with, the official reason, the reason his father sent him away, was to find a wife from his own people group, to go back to where the relatives of Rebekah were, back to those who were part of the family of Abram. But the real reason he was leaving was he was running for his life, because his twin brother Esau had been betrayed by him, had been tricked by him first to rob him of his birthright and then to steal his blessing from him. And how Esau had pledged that as soon as his father had passed away, Esau would kill his brother. And so Jacob was fleeing for his life. Sent away by his mother, and his mother said, "You go away until I can, calm things down, till Esau gets over this." Well, he's been gone now 20 years. "20 years have passed since he fled, and he's on his journey home." Genesis 32, starting at verse 1. Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And when Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's camp." So he called the name of that place Mahanaim. It's interesting, the name here, Mahanaim, actually means the place of two camps. So there is God's camp, and Jacob's camp. Jacob is not yet, it would seem, including himself in the camp of God. Though he's following him, though he's covenanting with him, the covenant relationship between Jacob and the God of Abraham and Isaac has not yet been fleshed out for him. And this is what's happening in this chapter. And Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau his brother in the land of Seir, the country of Edom, instructing them, "This you shall say to my lord Esau, thus says your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, male servants and female servants. I have sent to tell my lord in order that I may find favor in your sight." So here in the return, 20 years have passed. Jacob has not forgotten the reason why he left. We have the problem of Esau. So Jacob feels he's going to deal with this right now. He's going to deal with his twin brother, with the issue of his twin brother, by sending messengers to where he knows his twin brother lives. He's probably asked around and found out where his brother is. It's like, okay, I'm going to send servants and I'm going to say, look, I've been away for these 20 years. I have acquired things so I could, bless you or you could have the things of my father. I've got my own things now. Figures that he's just going to address this head on and everything's going to be okay. It's his way of testing to see where his brother is after 20 years. And then we see a picture of where it appears his brother is. And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, "We came to your brother Esau, and he is coming to meet you, and there are 400 men with him." Imagine Jacob. Jacob is thinking, okay, this could be a problem, so I'm going to deal with it now. We're going to deal with it head on. I'm going to send servants, and I'm going to basically sort of butter them up a bit, just get a feel of it. And the servants come back and say, "Esau, Esau is coming with 400 men." That's not a little travel party, that's an army. Esau is coming with 400 men, and he's coming for you, Jacob. He's heard now that you are coming back, that you're returning, and he's coming for you. Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. Because here's his problem. Remember in the last chapter, if you're with us, that watch post was set. That he was not to go back to Haran. That he covenanted before God with Laban that he would not go back there. So he's got the land in front of him. He's got nothing behind him. And yet in the land he's going into, there's the problem of Esau. Wondering how Esau was feeling. 20 years have passed. Esau had said that he would take his life when the opportunity came. Now 20 years later, he has let Esau know that he's there, and now Esau is coming to him with 400 men. Jacob has to figure out what to do. So let's see what Jacob does with this. He divided the people who were with him, and the flocks and herds and camels into 2 camps, thinking, if Esau comes to one camp and attacks it, then the camp that is left will escape. So what we see, Jacob's immediate reaction is to scheme. It's like, okay, what can we do? Well, I've got a lot. I'll divide it up. I'll create 2 encampments. So when he comes, if he hits one encampment, at least I'll keep what's in the other encampment. So there's one thought. They can't catch both of them. So if he hits one, the other could get away, and at least I'll be left with something. So he starts to scheme. Then see what comes next. Jacob has learned something. Verse 9. And Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham, and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, Yahweh, the covenant God, the ever-present one, O Lord, you said to me, return to your country and to your kindred, that I may do you good. I am not worthy of the least of all the deeds of steadfast love and of all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. For with only my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become 2 camps. Please deliver me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau. For I fear him, that he may come and attack me and the mothers with the children. But you said, I will surely do you good, and make your offspring as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. So Isaac realizes that his scheming is probably not going to keep him. So what does Isaac do? He falls on the promise. He falls on the promise. And we see that something is beginning to change here. I heard a Pastor Brad Summers speaking on this chapter recently, and he made an excellent descriptor. He said that Jacob was twisted, just as we all are, twisted in our sin nature, captive to sin, imprisoned under the mastery of sin. But God is beginning to untwist Jacob. And we see first it's the thought of the scheme, then he falls on the promise. Not only does he falls on the promise, but he also recognizes his position in the promise. This is huge. Notice this. I am not worthy, verse 10, of the least of all the deeds of steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. For with only my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I've become two camps. Please deliver me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him. It's like you promised that you would do me good. You made a promise to me, and I'm not worthy of the promise. I can't buy the promise. I can't say you owe me the promise. All I can say is, you gave me the promise. You made the promise. You came to me and I had nothing, and you gave me this promise. So I stand on that. Let's see what happens. So he stayed there that night, and from what he had with him, he took a present for his brother Esau, 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milking camels and their calves, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. These he handed over to his servants, every drove by itself, and he said to his servants, "Pass on ahead of me, and put a space between drove and drove." He instructed the first, "When Esau my brother meets you and asks you, 'To whom do you belong? Where are you going? And whose are these ahead of you?' Then you shall say, 'They belong to your servant Jacob. They are a present sent to my lord Esau. And moreover, he is behind us.' Likewise he instructed the second and the third and all who followed the droves. You shall say the same thing to Esau when you find him. And you shall say, 'Moreover, your servant Jacob is behind us.' For he thought, 'I may appease him with the present that goes ahead of me, and afterward I shall see his face. Perhaps he will accept me.' So the present passed on ahead of him, and he himself stayed that night in the camp." We see the struggle here. There was the scheme, divide into two camps. There was the falling on the promise, recognizing his position in relation to God, who maintained the promise, and why? Because of his steadfast love, the steadfast love of the covenant-making God. But now we see him thinking again, falling back into his schemes, and he's like, okay, well, I'll sacrifice what I have. This is what I'll do. I'll take a large portion of what I have and I'll send it before me as gifts to Esau, so it'll make up for what I took from him 20 years ago. That's what Jacob's thinking. If I can pay my debt to Esau, then Esau will spare my life. The same night he arose and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream and everything else he had, and Jacob was left alone. So Jacob takes everything he has and puts it on the other side of the river. And now Jacob is alone. I want you to notice this, because Jacob is in the exact same position he was 20 years before when he started this journey. Jacob is alone. Just as 20 years ago, laying in the dust with his head on a rock, he has this dream and he sees this stairway this ladder, these steps up to heaven. He sees ministering angels traveling up and down. He hears the voice of the Lord speaking to him. And he recognizes it as a special place, as the place of God, as the house of God, Bethel. Now he finds himself alone again. He's put everything else across the river and he's alone. And in that moment, he is met again. And a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. So here is Jacob in the dark, and out of the dark, someone comes to him. We know that this is the Lord. This is a theophany, maybe even a Christophany, that God, through some means, has presented himself to Jacob. He comes out of the dark and he meets with Jacob, and they're wrestling in the dark. They're wrestling, and Jacob will not let go. What we see acted out here is the physical representation of what we saw happening here. Jacob recognizing his position, that he has nothing save the promise to fall on, and he only has right to the promise because of the loving kindness of God who made the promise to him. And now he wrestles with God. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day has broken." This would be the one wrestling with Jacob. But Jacob said, "I will not let you go until you bless me." And the one said to him, "What is your name?" And Jacob said, "Jacob." And then the man said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "What is it? Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, "I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered." The sun rose upon him as he passed Penuel, limping because of his hip. Therefore to this day the people of Israel do not eat the sinew of the thigh that is in the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip on the sinew of the thigh. So we have this very powerful part of the narrative here. We have Jacob alone. He's sent his gifts to Esau. He's separated his family from him, and he's alone in the dark, wrestling with God, physically acting out what has already been happening in his mind, seeing his position. He can do nothing but cling to God, to nothing but hold on to God. He can't bring anything to the table anymore. Nothing is going to work. He can't go back past the watchpost to Laban, and going forward, there is Esau in front of him. So he wrestles with God. He wrestles with God all night, all the frustration, all the fear, clinging to this divine messenger, holding on to him. And then the messenger gives him a sign, touches him on the hip, and cripples him. Cripples him. For the rest of his life, Jacob the schemer, Jacob the manipulator, Jacob limps now in weakness for the rest of his life. And then God changes his name. He asks him what his name is, and Jacob says, "Jacob, the one who trips you up, the deceiver, the manipulator." And God gives him a new name. God says to him, "That's not your name anymore. Your name is now Israel, one who wrestles with God. One who wrestles with God, because see, God is untwisting Jacob. God is taking the manipulator and putting him into someone, changing him and molding him into someone who struggles with God, not manipulating men, but wrestling with God, to understand God, to fall on his promise. What a powerful place for Jacob to be. The one who tried to hold on to everything by his own means now finds himself clinging to God alone. There's no one else to wrestle with. There's no one else. He can't beat Esau. He's done his best. But something tells him that that's probably not good enough considering what he's done. He can't go back because of what's happened in the past. All he can do is fall on the promise, recognizing his place. And the sun comes up, and there he is limping. Limping in his weakness because he's wrestled with God. But he's wrestled with God, and God has, through this, been teaching him something. And then God gives him a new identity. Jacob was left. Jacob was left wounded. Israel now moves forward. One who wrestles with God. I would that all of us would grasp that we would cling to God, that we would fall on his promise, recognizing our own weakness, recognizing that we cannot, Jacob cannot by his means, and now physically there is this weakness in him, which is a picture of the weakness that he had in him. And that self-sufficiency, that manipulator. Now there doesn't need to be two camps, God's camp and Jacob's camp. Now there is just God's camp, and Jacob is in it. No separate camp anymore. Jacob is no longer there. Now it's God's camp, and Israel is in it. Israel is in God's camp. God is preparing him for what will come next. The God who made the promise. All Jacob has now to stand on as Israel. Is the promise true? Is the Lord true who made the promise? Is the promise true that was made? Because if it is, then all of this is in God's hands. So now, in this new day, with Esau coming toward him, Jacob is going to see the truth of the promise and the character of the God who made it, and his steadfast love. I encourage you, as you come through moments in life, when you wrestle with God, when he begins to untwist you, as he untwists each of us, as we come to the saving knowledge of Jesus Christ and put our trust in him, we become a new creation. But then God begins a work in us, a sanctifying work, as he begins to remold us into the image of his own Son. And there's a lot of untwisting that has to happen. There's a lot of situations where we have to put to realize that our ways are not going to work. And only by trusting in his promise is there hope and a future. So as you wrestle, be encouraged in the promises he's made, because he is sufficient to keep his promises. I hope this encourages you. Please share it with somebody else. Thank you, and God bless.